You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, good to be back with you again on the podcast. You are listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And we've got another big show today with 5 separate sections in the podcast. First off, we've got a recommendation from a former guest, Mike Curran, or Energizer, who I've interviewed twice on the show after his PCT hike and then more recently his AT through hike. Mike wrote to me about today's guest, Emet Baker, or Quickbeam. I'm going to spare Emet's blushes by simply reading one sentence that Mike wrote. He said, "I've never been so impressed by a young man as I was when hiking with Quickbeam. He's intelligent." Actually, this is 2 sentences. "He's intelligent, well-read and gifted." Now, I've heard plenty of hyperbole over the years, but Mike was absolutely spot on. Emet is all those things and more. As you'll hear, I was also massively impressed with this young man, and I'm sure you will be too. He'll be on in a moment. Then we've got 2 sections on the Mighty Blue Class of 23. First up, we're going to hear from Bryan Robbins, who's heading out in April, while we then catch up with Steve Kortekamp, who has some additional news of his own. Spoiler alert, he ain't going alone anymore. Then Dr. Lynn shares her knowledge of nutrition on the trail, even giving us some pointers about Snickers and Pop-Tarts. Finally, we're on to Chapter 14 of George Stefanos' Then the Hail Came, with George heading towards his home in Connecticut. He's quite amazed at how the trail has altered him, and he wonders what that old life is going to be like when he gets home. So let's get to it. Here is a pretty remarkable young man. This is Emet Baker, or Quickbeam. So we've got another of our 2022 AT completers this week. This is Emet Baker, or Quickbeam. Hey Emet, how are you?
You know, it's a great day.
Oh, no, who says that? Exactly. Yeah.
So I took a lot away from the part of the trail that I had hiked with this hiker Energizer, and he had this, catchphrase, or this, he'd always introduce his YouTube videos with this phrase, "It's a great day." And I've had very few not great days since I've met him. So it's kind of a philosophy that's been, prevailing in my life.
Well, there's definitely a mutual appreciation society, because you were suggested by a previous double guest, Mike Curran, or Energizer, and he hiked with you for some of your AT through hiking 2022. And well, let's just say that he was very flattered about you in his email to me. So I know I'm not going to embarrass you by reading what he wrote, but it was very nice, let me tell you. So let's find out a little bit more about what he was talking about. You are currently in Montreal in college. Tell us what you're studying there.
So I'm in the School of Environment here. The name of the domain of my major is called Ecological Determinants of Health.
And what does that actually mean?
Right. So the major entails it's a multidisciplinary major program. Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about, how different ecological aspects impact human health, as well as how at large, different processes are affecting the environment and the urbanization and the people that live in the environment.
So was being on the trail, were you able to make some interesting observations on the subject you're studying?
I think something that really stood out to me was how the thru hiking community conceptualizes nature and personifies the trail, especially in the West, and America's a great example of this. The general interaction with nature is that of dominion over nature. It is an untamed swath of wilderness that it's not that it's not respected, but it's something to have dominion over, whether it's where we're urbanizing or if we are, creating these massive national park systems like Theodore Roosevelt, advocated for. It was still for a place of hunting and having dominion and control over the territory.
Sure.
Now, I think the language that develops in the thru hiking community is that of, I think thru hiking is a great word for it. We're really just passing through all these, different scenic areas and geographic, locations, but
Sure.
it's really, working with the trail or having this great respect for just being allowed to pass through it.
I quite agree, because you can't take on the trail. The trail will kick your ass if you take on the trail. And I'm seeing way too many post-apocalyptic movies to let you know that people always say, men have ruined the planet. Don't you worry about the planet. The planet's going to be fine. It's men who might not be fine in the planet. The planet will always make a comeback. So what is it you actually training to be anything in particular, or is this a college degree to expand your worldview, or is there something you're aiming at?
Yeah, so the path that I'm aiming down is to become a physician's assistant. It firstly requires a bachelor's degree, and then there's a couple recs that I need to fill in to have a year of working experience, and then I'd go do a master's program. There's a lot of what attracts me to hiking that attracts me to the profession, but I would say mostly it's the ability to interact with people who are in, if not difficult, at least significantly atypical circumstances, and to be there just as someone who can listen and then as someone who can respond. And I think that's a parallel between the interaction that I enjoy on the trail and the interaction that the profession of a physician's assistant would give me access to.
How interesting. It's funny enough, I'm actually going to jump forward to one of the questions that I wrote down for you, but I'm actually going to take it sort of slightly out of turn. Let me find it where it was. I hope I don't mess this up. Let me have a look. Hang on a sec. Oh, yeah. Because when I talked to you about being sociable on the trail or not being sociable on the trail or whatever you were, because you were on a tight deadline, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you actually said something about there's something special about talking to somebody just one time.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that observation. I think that was, I'd not thought about it like that. For me, I'd see somebody and I may not see them again. I'd kind of regret that. But for you, you made a real positive about that.
Yeah, there's a great freedom in having the mutual understanding that you're likely not going to have more, interaction with or conversation with an individual beyond the one time that you're having a conversation with them or that you cross paths with them. Sure. And I think, most people, there's something fairly existential, and maybe that's a generalization, that draws them out to do that hike. There's some element of searching both in the physical world and in our internal personas that, people are seeking something out there. And I think that just using the trail as a medium to explore that internal search is a commonality between many people who are on the trail. And when we have the good fortune of intersecting and our journeys and have this one fulcrum or this point where we're meeting, we have the freedom to be utterly personal. And the way I hiked the trail, and we can get into it in a bit, is that I had the typical understanding that I likely wouldn't see the people that I met again.
Sure.
But the one conversation, I had so many enriching and significantly positive, deep emotional conversations with people that we both had the freedom to open up and
sure.
and right and
it's funny actually. You see these people just the once, and I often went away from a conversation with somebody saying to myself, why did I say that? Why was I wouldn't say that to one of my best friends. And yet
Yeah.
in that quiet, sometimes dark shelter, or sitting on a picnic table, you're talking to someone and something comes out and you respond in a way you would never normally do. And there's something about being out there that really does it to you. And you found this when you were out there, and you're only a very young guy. You actually only recently turned 20, didn't you?
That's right. This past November.
Yeah. So, for you were having these conversations, I'm sure, with a lot of, well, you hype with Mike, and Mike's about in his 50s. I'm not actually sure, so I hope he is in his 50s. And so you two were entirely different types of people as well. So
Yeah.
what was it like? Talk about spending some time with Mike then.
Sure. Yeah. I think of the trail as a great equalizer. I mean, really, once you're on that footpath, at the end of the day, we're all hikers. And this also gives us like a shared vocabulary to express ideas through. And
Sure.
and I think that having this overarching journey and goal that any other demographic characteristics that in any other interaction outside of the trail might have an influence on the content of what's being said in the conversation, or these societal
Yeah, absolutely.
norms
Yeah.
are kind of removed once you're on the footpath. And so Energizer, he really was the first hiker that I had really interacted with out there. He was the first person that had a trail name that I met. It was the 2 hours into that May 1st was both our start date, and it actually was pouring. It was this kind of flash rainstorm, and I just remember it was the closest. There was a lightning strike, and it shook the world around me. It was almost like
Yeah, everything's more extreme out there, isn't it? I mean, lightning when it hits, oh my gosh, it really hits you hard, doesn't it? Especially when you're up a mountain. Yeah, God damn me.
Oh yeah, but Energizer was right there when that kind of flash happened, and he introduced himself to me, and I'll be honest, I was thinking in my head, like, I was ready to dust this guy. I still hadn't like gotten, I didn't have an understanding of, I guess, like, that there were other individuals out there who hike the trail aggressively, be outside of, the whole FKT and sport community.
Sure.
I kind of, had the resolution that I wouldn't be, really be able to have a trail family or anybody that I was able to hike with. But, Energizer is just he really, I think, there's qualities in the hikers that I found myself hiking with that kind of enabled them to, to put up the mileage and have the consistency. And there's obviously, more than one, but something that really stands out to me about Energizer is just his discipline. And, to this day, I've never seen him set up his tent or take it down. He was like a flash in and out of camp. And he would walk these long days. I mean, it's not like I was walking short days either. We had this kind of routine for a while where we'd be like, okay, there's this hostel about a 4 days walk now that meets both of our mileage goals.
Sure.
And we'd book a room or like a bunk for the both of us, and we'd kind of get on our way and be like, see you there. And over those, 4 days, it would be, he would always get started earlier than I would. And sometime around midday to 3 o'clock, I'm a faster walker than he is. And I'd pass him and I'd say, all right, see you later, Energizer. And then I would go make camp somewhere at 8:30. It's already getting dark. I'm just getting my tent set up or just getting some food out to eat. And I hear, the steady footsteps of who's this crazy person hiking with a headlamp on right now? And I'd be, oh, it's Energizer, right? Like, are you gonna make camp here? And he's like, no, I think I'm gonna keep going. And that scenario played out maybe 10 times, or just, It was just, yeah. And so I really think I took away, not only a lot of shared experience and I guess, just a friend, but so much of what makes Energizer, arguably just an elite hiker, especially at his age demographic, really has stuck with me, for the rest of the trail and also in just life outside of the trail.
That's nice. Not quite as nice as what he said about you, but we won't go into that. No, that's lovely stuff.
I could go on.
I know. But many of the guests on this show have wanted to hike the AT for, I don't know, sometimes 40 or 50 years. When did you first learn about the AT and what made you want to hike it?
Yeah. So my story really starts, I think I was 14. We had a family
only 6 years ago, by the way.
We had a family friend who was very familiar with the 48 4,000 footers in New Hampshire.
Sure.
And it was actually on the trip of my first 4,000 footer, which is Mount Moosilauke.
Yeah.
We encountered a thru hiker at that time. It was in May. He had a February start date. His trail name was Uncle Grandpa. And it was the first I'd heard about the trail, was meeting someone who was on it. Oh. And I guess the idea that there was this long extended footpath that almost, people would go on these nomadic journeys and just step away from other elements of their lives to go do this walk was a profound, it was really outside of my worldview. It was amazing to, encounter this guy in New Hampshire who had just been walking. That was the only, medium of transportation.
From Georgia. Amazing.
It's amazing. And, but I would say like it kind of stayed in the back of my mind. I didn't at that time, have this burning desire to go out and do it someday. Right. What really inspired me and kind of rekindled that, my older brother and I had done some hiking in the White Mountains, but I had a friend who in 2021 hiked the Appalachian Trail. He's known to the trail as Pythagoras. And I would see his like Instagram updates every couple of weeks or so. And he's like, oh man, is he still out doing this hike? And that kind of put it back on my radar. And when I realized for this past summer that I kind of had a period of time to go do it, I jumped on it and I did it in my own way. And the way it kind of played out was I had to, stay in school and finish the end of my winter semester. And there was a summer job that I really wanted to work at a camp. And that kind of it was an 86-day window.
I only just realized that today, that the summer camp was a job you had to get back to. So when you actually started the trail, it was literally, because this was really was going to be the question, but it kind of hits it anyway. How do you manage to study at college, prepare for an AT through hike, and then do an AT through hike in that short period of time? So you literally finished your college at what date? Your last exam?
I had my last exam on April 27th.
And you started the AT on May the 1st?
Yeah. So it was that day, my dad drove up to Montreal. I got out of my last exam at like 5 p.m. and, we had already loaded the car. And that day we started driving down to Georgia, stopping for one night at our house in New Hampshire to get all my stuff and just make sure everything was situated. And then, yeah, it was I'm really happy I actually drove down as opposed to any other form of travel, because Montreal is just south of Katahdin. So in many ways, I kind of drove the route that I would be walking back from, and the drive is much quicker.
I bet. Oh dear. So your dad took you down there. By the way, how did you prepare? Did you get gear or did you train? I mean, how did you actually get ready for this? Because if you're studying for your finals, it must be quite difficult to combine the two things.
Definitely. The way I prepared, it was kind of a fusion of different, I guess, athletic disciplines. I'm a big believer in just strength training for endurance athletes, and I think just for the bone density benefits and just structural reasons for the muscles, I would make sure to really hit weights 2 or 3 times a week. And
sorry, just sorry to interrupt you. Are you an endurance athlete as well? I mean, do you do other like marathons and stuff like that?
I've not, done any formal marathons, but I do love to run. There's a mountain, quote unquote mountain here.
Mm.
It's more of a hill, but I really, love that this city has a place where I can go be in the trees and go. Um, there's this whole network of cross country ski trails, and so
Nice, nice.
kind of I never really measured distance, but I would in the peak of my training for about 3 months before the hike, I would be, going for an hour run 3 days a week. And then I'd try to get like the long run on Sunday, which was inspired by, how the Kenyan runners, train, and Kipchoge is, one of my heroes, just in terms of his, his mentality and his dedication to his craft.
Sure.
And, they do this thing called the long run on Sundays. And, they don't drink any water or anything. They just get up and go run a marathon. And so I was like, okay, I can do half of that. And so I'd spend, 2.5 hours of the Sunday, 3 hours, and I'd just go for this long run. And so it was the strength training a couple days a week, maybe 4 days of running. And something I try to do in as big or little of a capacity as I can is yoga. And
yeah, I want to talk about that. I've never heard, I'm sure lots of people practice yoga, and I'm sure lots of people go on the trail practice yoga. But for you, that was a really important part of your preparation, wasn't it? But you've been doing it for a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess stretching and is kind of a value that my parents really instilled in us as kids, and it's totally normal at our house or just at family gatherings that someone will be doing stretches in the corner and nobody will blink twice. But yeah,
That must be funny, actually.
yeah, no, but really I view yoga as a practice. I view it in a couple ways. I firstly view it as a mechanism to, just explore how I'm feeling physically and developing an awareness of where my body is in space. And I think that element of yoga really helped me. I did battle some injury on the trail, and just being able to have this, this daily practice where I'm just feeling, where, how to control my body in space and developing, really like a mind muscle or a mind body connection.
Sure.
Is something that really translated well to the hike. But I also think that there is a kind of strength and structural, or like a structural solidification kind of element to the practice as well, where a lot of the poses that go into it, and there's a wide range of yogic practices, but really the idea is that an anatomically, quote unquote, correct, it's unique to every body, but it's trying to get you to explore what
Yeah, you should have seen me trying yoga once. It was certainly my efforts at yoga were certainly unique to my body. I just couldn't do it
absolutely.
at all. So hang on. So it's basically a stretching thing. It stretches your body out. And would you do that before your day's hike or after your day's hike, or would you basically spread it around through the day and just keep stretching and keep being aware of what your body was doing?
Right. Yeah. It's definitely an active stretching. I every day on the trail, on the through hike, I would spend about 10 minutes in my tent, kind of going through a routine.
Nice.
and where I would, there's this deep internal dialogue that I found that really developed along, the time that I was out hiking. I felt that I was always asking myself, how am I feeling? What's tight today? What are the asymmetries in how I'm walking? Is my gait different? What's my pole placement? All these, and kind of trying to use the cues that I was hearing and feeling in my body to try to just on a daily basis, practice developing an economy of motion that would just help me move forward and put less, pressure on a part of my body that was feeling like it was doing more than its share, or if I had I guess, like, I'm thinking to this point, it was before the Smokies, and it was actually, I'd seen Energizer the day before, and I was listening actually to his PCT interview with you, and he had this kind of story of where he was just going over this exposed area in a lightning storm, and
Right.
didn't know what
That's
he was
right.
doing.
Yes. Yes.
Thought he knew what he was doing, and that kind of was, how there was this really stormy day when we were going into the NOC. You're crossing like multiple exposed balds, and it was this, like, there's maybe 3 or 4 big ones throughout it was like a 26-mile stretch to get to the NOC. And every time I would start a climb up to one of the balds, I would hear these war horns in the background, and I was like, oh, here comes a storm. I could have just stayed away. And when I got to the top, it was just like lightning, and I had to get food, and I was still at this point, I was scared, and so I would just run. I would just kind of like amp myself up and run across these balds. And I think in doing that, I strained my left quad a little bit, and it was getting to the point where I wasn't able really to walk right. I had to kind of keep it straight, and I was sitting at the base of the Smokies, and which is like a 77-mile stretch, and you can only get out really at Gatlinburg, like halfway through. And I just had this, again, like this internal dialogue where it's like, I recognized I was injured, and I recognized that I would have to do something to change the way I was hiking. But I felt like I could do it physically. And I KT taped it and wrapped it, and I was still getting into camps in the Smokies limping. But, I think that's also something, there's certain mistakes that I was able to get away with because I'm young, I think.
Yes, that might have something to do with it. Yeah, because I don't get away with those mistakes at all.
Right. Well, that's why, I'm trying to learn them now. Right.
So tell us about your name, Quickbeam. I know it's got a bit of a story behind it about your grandfather, which was quite interesting.
Yeah. So, to keep it somewhat brief, my grandfather, he got a Vietnam War draft notice and made the decision, not to he didn't believe in the cause. And so he, ran to Canada and joined the pacifist movement. And, during the time that he was, going, he kind of, went up the coast of California to Vancouver, and he took on an alias, Treebeard. And so I grew up calling him Grandpa Tree. Another component of the story is that, like, Tolkien is kind of a staple in my family. Like, Grandpa Tree, he read the trilogy and The Hobbit to my father, who read it to me. And it's just kind of a world that on a generational level, like, my family is just into. And I was telling this story to this hiker, Cardinal, who I actually still stay in touch with. And he's a kind of a kindred spirit. He likes all the same musicians I like, and is also, really into, the whole, yoga and strength lifting practices that I'm into.
Sure.
But, he kind of turned to me and he's like, you should take on a name, you should take on a Tolkien name and something that like relates to your grandpa. And so, in the story, Treebeard is an Ent, which are these like walking trees, and Quickbeam is another one of the Ents who's, in terms of the species of Ent is a somewhat hasty decision maker and walker. And we both kind of laughed a bit about that. And I took on the name Quickbeam.
It's a great name. It really is a great name. I really like it, actually. So Mike told me that you carried and played a ukulele. And I often wonder why people carry instruments on the trail. Is it a calming instrument for you? Because the reason I ask is I saw you playing in one of Energizer's videos. I think it looked like it was in the Grayson Islands, but maybe it wasn't. You looked so in the zone and relaxed. Is this something that calms you when you're in your everyday life?
Absolutely. I almost view the guitar or I guess stringed instruments and ukulele as almost my therapist.
All right.
I kind of, I really think it's a very good medium for me to be able to, emotionally express myself and also just like work through some thoughts in my head. And I think I had up to that point, ever since I had picked up the guitar when probably around the same time I went for that original hike up Mount Musalaki, I hadn't put it down, for any day since.
Sure, sure.
And so I wanted to, and I play music here in Montreal. It's a little side thing that I do. I play shows and I busk
Oh,
and so it's a
really?
bit of a,
Really? Oh, I didn't know
yeah.
that.
And there's
Oh,
a whole
interesting.
like, musicians community that I wanted to still be a part of and still keep up my chops. And so, carrying a ukulele appealed to me for many reasons. But I'll just tell a quick story about, I think one of the most, I mean, this might illustrate, the reason why I brought it. And so it was a day, it was a couple miles from the end of the Shenandoahs, and I was kind of camped, not super high up, but somewhat high up on this like little ridge line. And I woke up at midnight or 1 to a storm and at that point I had seen weather, but it was a storm that just on I guess like on a gut feeling level, just felt wrong. The wind sounded a little bit too loud. There was
Yes.
lightning a little bit too often. And so I turned on my cell phone and turned on the data, and I got this Amber Alert, and it was just like tornado in your area. It's passing
Wow.
through the town of Leroy, and I look on like far out, and I'm directly above like Leroy, and
Hmm.
and the decision I made, the safest thing for me to do, which didn't feel that all that safe, was to just stay in my tent and hope like a blowdown didn't, and so I just kind of I
Sure,
really had
sure.
to accept um, whatever was going to happen, and that staying put was the safest decision I could make, given that I was nowhere near a shelter,
Mhm.
and so what I did is I just took out my ukulele and I wrote a song, and I just was sitting there, you know, watching the trees kind of through the silhouette of my or the little the transparency of my tent,
Sure, sure.
and kind of composed a song, and that was, you know and what was going through my head was just having to accept whatever the experience, and that was kind of an overarching daily practice that I got to do on the trail. It was just like
What a wonderful thing for you to have, that you experienced something, and I'm sure fear was part of that experience in that particular case,
100%.
to actually put together a song that. Do you still play it? Do you still know it?
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
I
What
you still
what'd
play
you
that.
call
Yeah.
it? What did you call it?
I don't know. I don't name my songs all too often, but
All right, that's it. That's great to have your song for that particular event, and of course, because you were in a hurry and you had to get out after a certain number of days. I think you took 90 days in the end. Um, then there was Katahdin, and you had, as I'd imagined you would do, because of people have learned already, you're a very articulate young man. You had an opinion upon, not an opinion, but you expressed your feelings to me on what it was like to touch the sign of Katahdin, and it kind of surprised me a little bit. Would you like to talk about that? And you did talk about death or mortality.
yeah, I think I found that I really began to conceptualize the trail as this pervasive analogy for death and for a lifespan, and even on a daily level. Like, we wake up, and we don't it's a beginning. We don't have a great idea of, I guess in my case, really where I'd end up, and each day is full of events, and it's a journey within its own right. And I found that, it's kind of each day was like a microcosm for a lifespan, and the collection of, days that compose the beginning,
Sure.
middle, and then end of the trail is a similar, microcosm for life. But the idea in my head even before I stepped foot on trail, was that I wanted to know what it was like to climb Katahdin, having walked the entire footpath to get there. And there's only, a number of people who've had that experience. And for me, I didn't know what it was going to be like. I didn't even try to think about what it would be like, and just to really focus right on each step and on each day. But when I did, touch that brown sign, and there was a certain finality to the ending that I didn't, it took me a while to process, but it felt in some ways like a period of grieving in a way, because with touching that sign, it also ended that experience and who I was on that experience. And I knew that, I was in this place where I was finding deep fulfillment out of each day. And even the really hard days, I found always that I was able to find just a rich comedy in some of the, where you're just out there in the middle of nowhere, and you're sitting in the rain eating a soggy tortilla, and you're hurting because you're sore, and you just walked a long time and you still have a long way to go. Like,
Sure.
I felt like I could laugh at that. And there were certain elements that are hard, outside of the trail, that I find a lot less funny. But I walk away really from the experience with just overwhelming gratitude. And that, to me, just for the people that I was able to meet out there, and, just for the good fortune of having the health to, to complete it, and the support of my family, I'm, just beyond grateful to just be one of those people who can say they've experienced, that climb, and having walked that footpath. But the other thing I will say is that, and I'm going to introduce, two really important characters. So I, around the halfway mark, met this guy, Canoe, and Canoe was actually carrying a trumpet. And we kind of got
Put
into
the band together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Sometimes we did at tent sites, and we kind of got into a conversation that has never ended. And we met up with this fellow Kodak at like about 3/4 of the way through the trail, and they both had graduated university in the December of that year. They're both 23. Kodak's turning 24, I believe, this weekend. I'm going to his party in New Haven, and
Nice.
I got to hike the trail with still young individuals, but had just at a stage of life where they're contemplating the transition from post university into the world, and that's kind of the setting and the mental state and the state of their life that they were walking through.
Sure.
And I feel a lot less stressed about that transition, having gotten to know them, because they're doing just magnificent. It's not just like graduate and your life is over, or anything like that. Not like
it's not over.
not like I would, but sometimes you can such a drastic change, and all my life it has been right just in the education system. Just a fundamental transition before this trail was a point of stress, and that has entirely dissipated. And it was also getting to know people like Energizer and people like yourself, that like you can be 60, Nimblewood Nomad, you can be 83, and you can still have a incredibly rich interaction with the outdoor environment. And so like I'm my overarching goal, right, is to be doing this when I'm 90, but at the end of the day, I'm just very grateful, and all the the whatever process of grief went into touching that sign has been entirely superseded by just an overwhelming sense of gratitude.
Well, you know what? You put that absolutely beautifully, and I'm glad you got that out of it, because when we first started talking the other day, I thought to myself, did he enjoy it? And yet I could tell from where you were talking that you did enjoy it, you know. But this idea of grief and death and so on was kind of tough to hear out of a 20-year-old. But of course, now that you've worked out the model of how to stay in college and do a long through hike, I know that next May you're doing the same thing, aren't you, on the PCC?
That's right. I'm headed out west. I don't think I have, the ability to articulate how excited I am for that trip. I kind of got to taste this just alternate reality in some ways. It feels like when I was hiking, it felt like I couldn't imagine what life outside the trail was like, and it felt like it was an infinite kind of experience in its own right. But now to go back and know, I can't have any expectation for what's going to happen, but I just know it's going to be eventful.
It's going to be awesome. And you're going to be one of the very few people, I suspect, because if you keep this up and you do the CDT the year after, you could do the Triple Crown while you're in college and getting all your grades and everything, which will be a remarkable achievement. I think you're, I understand what Mike wrote about you. In fact, when he wrote about you in such glowing terms, I thought, oh yeah, I've heard that before. But you know what? You met every expectation of me talking to you. I rarely feel intellectually disadvantaged with many people, but I tell you, you're a smart young man, and you just given a great interview to me. And I really appreciate you coming and share your story. And please, when you do the PCT, come back on next year and tell us how that went, because I'm sure you're going to have an equally rich experience, and you as a person are going to continue to grow and grow and grow. And I love the fact that hiking is helping you do that. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
I really appreciate it. I had a wonderful time. Thank you for having me.
Okay, buddy. Take it easy, okay?
Take it easy.
Bye. Saying that I've rarely felt intellectually disadvantaged sounded a bit cocky while I was editing, but I'm sure you know what I was feeling. This young man was so articulate, explaining in minute detail his thoughts and what the trail had meant to him. I don't think I've ever met a 20-year-old like him. I'm sorry if it came off like I think I may have sounded. I can't wait to see what he does in the next couple of summers. That'd be something, wouldn't it? Completing the Triple Crown while completing a degree. What a guy. Now, I want to mention something that's come up before and will doubtless come up again in the future, but I think it's important to let you know this. Several people have written to me recently and I haven't responded, which is something I try to avoid at all costs. However, I let my steve@mightyblueandtheat.com email address lapse about a year ago, and I no longer have access to it. So if you've written to me and thought, what the hell, he just ignored me, I promise you, I haven't ignored you. I just never got the email. Always, if you're writing to me, use the steve@hikingradionetwork.com address and I'll get back to you. I've been wanting to clear that up for a couple of weeks, and I know that a lot of you go back to the beginning to listen to the podcast, and you probably hear that email address and not the Hiking Radio Network one. Well, by the time you reach the Hiking Radio Network one, you'll realise I haven't been ignoring you. Now the class of 2023, and this week we've got on a guest I had a beer with a couple of years ago when he told me that this was what he was planning to do. So let's meet Bryan Robbins. Well, today's guest is somebody else I've met in the past. I got a message from Bryan Robbins, a couple of years ago, I think, and we met up for a beer, didn't we, Bryan?
That's right.
First off, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Steve? Mighty Blue?
I'm good. I feel pretty good, yeah. I know you're going to be joining the Mighty Blue class of 23, which means you're going this year, obviously. One of the things that I'm asking everybody is, what is your why? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing it now? And has this been some sort of a long-term ambition?
Well, I guess it was 2019 I kind of had an epiphany. I was something that years and years ago was a dream of mine. Mm-hmm. And I kind of put it way back in some compartment. But in 2019, I was searching for a movie to watch for my wife and I on Netflix, sure, or one of those platforms. And I stumbled across A Walk in the Woods. kind of a silly movie. I hadn't read the book.
Shocking movie, by the way. Great book, but terrible movie.
But it brought back all those memories to me. And with an upcoming retirement, only 3 years away, around the corner, I said, you know what? That spiked that interest again with me.
How did your wife respond to that?
I don't think she really knew. I mean, I asked a buddy. A lot of people, you know, I live in Mississippi now. I've lived in Mississippi for 30 years. Uh-huh. And a lot of people here, when I tell them, they're like, well, is that a couple of week thing? Or they really don't know. And she didn't know. And we were getting ready to actually, this is kind of funny that we were getting ready to take a trip to Europe. My stepdaughter was getting married in Austria. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to download some Netflix movies and some podcasts. Had just started doing podcasts. I actually downloaded a couple of your podcasts. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until on that flight to Europe that I listened to your podcasts and watched a couple of movies about the Appalachian Trail that she watched with me. And it was kind of funny that a movie that I downloaded was what's his name? Carl Metzer, breaking the record.
Yeah.
So right off on the bat, my wife had this image of her being in a van and meeting me at every road crossing, and I had to walk her back on that a little.
Sure.
Because he'd do it like 38 days or 40 days or whatever it was.
I would imagine listening to my show, particularly my show more than most podcasts, we do tend to feature some of the older people who hike as well. And I know the demographic of my show shifts older than quite a few of them actually. And it's probably, and I think I've had this from people before, how, especially from older people who think, your show made me realize I could do something I never thought I could do. So I think that itself is a wonderful thing for us as a group. And I'm happy that, we give that sort of inspiration out there. Now, so obviously 3 years, you said you were in 2019, your retirement was coming up 3 years time. So we've reached that. Are you now retired then?
Actually, no, my official retirement date is, in the first week of June, but I'm actually saved all my leave, and I'm going to be using plan to start April 12th.
Oh, right. So when's your last day at work going to be? April the 10th?
April 11th.
Oh my God, the day before.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, right.
Well,
no messing about then.
I'm even thinking of driving, and in fact, I put that as an actual start date the weekend before. I work 4/10, so I'm off Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and we're going to drive out, and I'm going to do the approach trail and however far I can get in those 3 days. Nice. And then come back, do the retirement, drive right back again.
Nice, really nice. Yeah. So what is your hiking experience? You said this relit a past desire to do something like this. Have you been a hiker, or is this something that you just thought, this looks like a good idea?
Up to 2019, I had never put a backpack on and hiked. Right. So
like many of us, Bryan,
right.
and I think that's one of the great things of this, the egalitarian nature of this trail. You can literally go from not knowing anything to learning stuff, because by doing 2,000 miles, if you get 2,000 miles, you've learned stuff, and you'll learn what not to do, and you'll make mistakes along the way. So you haven't done anything.
That's another reason your podcast helped spike the interest even more is, I think one of the first podcasts I listened to, I don't know if it was part where you were reading your book or you were talking about it, and you talked about your first night setting up your tent on the trail and never really spent a night at a tent. I mean, that really hit home, right?
Yeah, it did me that night as well, I'll tell you. I almost crawled into my tent that night, embarrassed, that I thought, well, this is ridiculous. What on earth are you doing, mate? It's crazy. So what have you been doing then to prepare physically for this? Because, this is largely a mental challenge, but what have you been doing to make sure that you're up to it physically? Because it does hit you in the face straight away.
Well, I'm kind of like you have sometimes talked about, of where you go through different stages of fitness
Yeah.
and weight. And like last year, a buddy at work of mine had a challenge of losing weight, so it was running and hiking
Sure.
but as in hiking itself, I've never done more than 2 nights in a tent, and I've never, never done a large section hike. Last year, a couple of times now, I have went to visit my son up in Pennsylvania, and he lives in Carlisle, right off the trail.
Right. Cool.
And I have stopped on the way. I've done parts of the Blue Ridge part. Last year, I did Highland Graceland with the ponies, and
Nice.
and that's where I had an injury last year. Fell and broke
Yes.
my wrist.
Yes,
And-
that's not good. That's not a good sign.
No, that's a lot of the people that razz me here are how many bones do you got and how many miles are.
You got legit. How many bones are you going to break per mile? Terrible. So you're getting some fitness, and you've been on the trail. What about the mental side? Have you thought about those bad days, because there will be loads of them, when you think to yourself, this is just ridiculous? How do you think you'll be able to talk yourself out of it?
Well, I'm big on challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And
This is a big challenge.
That's a big challenge. And I think I'm pretty mentally tough. I mean, sure, everybody asks me concern about bears or about other strange people or about different things. Number one isn't, hey, am I going to get tired of it? Number one is, hey, how's things going to be at home? And my wife is great and
sure.
support me on this. But, that's number one on my list is, hey, wife going to be okay?
Yeah,
And
sure.
I got family and friends here. They're going to keep an eye on her. And I feel pretty confident about it. And she feels pretty confident about it. But it can't help it, that's number one in your life, right?
Yeah, that's right. And you think, you're lying in bed some nights and you're thinking, I am just having a blast out here. And then you realize that the person you left behind is not only looking after their shit, but they're looking after your shit as well. So
That's right.
So there's things that need to be handled. And have you, you've obviously started your equipment from scratch. If you only relatively recently started, are you quite comfortable that the equipment you have is dialed in? Have you done shakedowns and things like that? Other than what you said just now?
Just a couple of weeks ago, I went over to a mountain in Alabama, and I didn't think it would be much of a mountain, but it was pretty good. Oak Mountain State Park, and did a couple of nights, and temperature got down to 27, and I was very comfortable. I have a REI 17 bag. I'm thinking I'm probably going to switch that out, and I have I didn't go ultralight in my tent. I got a MSR Hubba.
Yeah, that was a popular tent when I was out there, actually.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable in that tent. That stuff, and my pack is Exos, Exos bag, and it's light, and it's not ultralight, but it has that Exo, internal frame. And
so, what do you think you'd be starting out with weight-wise then?
well, the couple of hikes I've done now that doesn't have like change of clothes or doesn't have 3 or 4 days of food in it. It is it was 17 and a half pounds.
Well, that's fine. That's darn good, actually. That's pretty darn good. And so and you just mentioned food. I've learned from my 2 hikes that getting resupplied from home is great for a number of different reasons, but just resupplying in town is so much more efficient because, going into town with no food is a wonderful thing because you're going to stock up and you don't have to carry too much. Have you thought about how you're going to handle that resupply?
I've looked at it 2 ways. I'm not real picky on it if I decide just to get from home, from in town, or my wife has started doing some dehydrating and is learning about that, and we're going to see how that runs. But
Sure.
I'm not gonna. Luckily, being it's retirement and got a good retirement going on, I'm not going to have to worry so much depending, okay, the bag didn't come in that I'm looking for. I'm not going to stay here a day and wait for a box to come in.
Sure,
I'm going to go ahead and move on and go buy something in the town. So
right. That that's a comfortable and good position to be in as well. And will you be cold soaking, or are you going to cook?
Oh, definitely cook. I got a jet boil. I got to have my coffee in the morning.
Yeah, you know what, and that's the end of it, isn't it, really? You just got to have that. Cold coffee. These people who have frozen coffee in Starbucks now, I just have no idea what that's all about. I just don't get it at all. And people have expectations on this trip. They're looking for something, or they expect something. What are your general expectations? You obviously want to finish. What will look good to you? You know, what is it going to be?
The challenge, and I want to complete the whole thing. That's going to be big for me. And I'll be able to rationale with myself if it don't happen. But the challenge, that's pretty heavy with me. And I feel, a lot of hikers. I just got done reading a book by a young gentleman that was in the medical field like me, and
Sure.
And he at 27 was burnt out and went and hiked the trail, and that's what he needed in his life. And
Sure.
I'm kind of different. I've always been very, stable, and I'm looking at this as a reward of being stable my whole life, earning this retirement, earning the ability to get out there and probably do something that's pretty unstable.
Yeah. I about to say you're about to change your life more than you will ever realize. So, but it's one of those things that I know that people have this thing that, the challenge. I want to do this. I want to finish. If you did just 1,000 miles, is a heck of a long way to go. But I know there will be massive disappointment not to do the rest of it. But I think, look, taking these, what's this? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. You just bite bits of it at a time. And so when you get, say, 100 miles, which is, Albert Mountain is 100 miles, that's a massive milestone to go past. And then
Exactly.
You have a 200 miles, and you get 3 or 4, and you get to Damascus, 430 miles, whatever it is. All these things, you just stop looking at Katahdin. Just enjoy where you are at the time, because Katahdin is a heck of a long way away. And
yeah, that's good advice.
And in terms of things you're looking forward to, obviously, you've heard on the show about the beauty on the trail in terms of relationships and people and
Right.
and views and so on. What are you most looking forward to out there?
I'm looking forward to the vistas, to the adventure, meeting people that have similar interests. Everybody always asks, are you taking someone with you? Well, a lot of people do that, and then they find out they have different hiking speeds.
Sure.
And I'm interested in finding people that have similar hiking styles, similar interests, and things they want to do when they go into town, and that interests me a lot.
Do you know, my two hikes, I hiked mostly with people who are diametrically opposed to me on every aspect of life. And I love that part of it because of the politics and the religion. None of it comes up, which is great.
That's great.
I didn't need that. And what are you least looking forward to? Is there anything out there you're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't really
I'm
fancy
originally
this?
from down by where you are now in St. Petersburg.
Yes.
And I don't like cold. That was a good test for me a couple of weeks ago with it getting down so low, and I was comfortable with it. But I wrote that down, cold rain.
Yeah. It sucks. It sucks badly, by the way.
Right. That does not entice me at all, cold and rain. Luckily, one of the things about having to start behind the bubble is it's not going to be the coldest.
It can, April 12th, yes, but it can be. I had 7 degrees in the Smokies in April the 7th, I think it was. So you still are going to get some cold weather, but at the same time, you should be okay. It's at the end of your hike. If you take 6 months, it starts getting pretty darn fresh then up north. So, but you know what? You'll be so attuned to it by then. And
That's
this
right.
is why, I think you'll have so many miles under your legs. You'll be moving better. You'll stay warm. I wouldn't worry too much about that. And what about a trail name then, Bryan? Have you thought of a trail name, or are you going to let someone name
I've
you?
thought of names, and I'm probably going to follow your suit and end up naming myself, but I haven't decided yet. The one I first came up with, no one seems to like it. I'm a Buccaneer fan.
Yeah, yeah.
Been since 1976, and
You're going to
I
call yourself
thought
Brady.
no, it wasn't because of Brady. It's because of where I was from, and Uncle Buck. I thought of, for Buccaneer, Uncle
Nice,
Buck.
nice, yeah.
I've thought of one of my friends named me, and I'm a physical therapist, and he named me PT Cruiser. And
Nice, yeah, not bad.
I don't know if you're familiar with that car, the PT.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. There's a lot of them in the UK, actually.
Right. And, but I don't know if I want to advertise that I'm a physical therapist. You had a physical therapist on a few weeks ago.
I agree. People can be expecting you to treat them all the bloody time.
I don't want to have people laying on rocks waiting for me to show up.
That's right. Yeah.
And then, I'm going to be on leave when I first get started, the first 8 weeks or 7 weeks. And, I've thought of on leave.
That's not a bad one. You know what, though? If you're not tied to any of them, let someone name you. And if you like it, take it. If you don't take it. It doesn't matter at all. Brian's good enough to start with.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah. Okay, man. Well, look, I obviously wish you the best. I hope it does work out and you really enjoy it, because that's the most important thing. What I'd like to do is keep in touch with you, and before you go, once or twice, we'll get back online again and talk about your preparations. And I just, as I say, I wish you the best and hope you make it to the end.
Thanks a bunch, Steve.
Take it easy, Ian. Cheers.
Bye now.
Bye. He's starting quite late, isn't he? He should get decent weather for the first 4.5 months, but then he'll need his cold gear. Best of luck, Bryan. Now an update from somebody you've already met in the class of 23. Here is Steve Kortekamp. Well, we're back on for actually one of our first updates. We're back on with Steve Kortekamp. Hey, Steve, how are you?
Good, Steve. Good to talk to you.
And you've had a change of plan. Now, the good news is you haven't cancelled. Tell us what you've done.
My daughter has decided to do the whole trip with me.
Now, did you talk her into it, or did she talk you into it?
I offered, and she jumped on board right away. She didn't even hesitate.
Good Lord. Good. Well, in that case, we must speak to her. Hey, Brooke, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm kind of wondering why you're doing this. If you weren't going to do it in the first place, what suddenly changed?
Well, I've always wanted to do it, and I figured now that he's doing it, it's the perfect time to jump on and do it with somebody rather than do it alone by myself.
Sure.
So,
I mean, have you done much backpacking yourself in the past?
I haven't done long trails, but I have done backpacking trips. I've done a lot of canoe trips.
Right.
With women's groups, and so I figured this is the perfect time to do the Appalachian Trail.
So who's in charge? and by the way, that's not meant to be a joke, because there'll be a time out there where you're going to need to support each other. And while he's your dad, he's your hiking buddy as well. So have you considered that the interrelationship you're going to have out on the trail?
Yeah.
Oh, she does.
You go first. You go first, Brooke.
I'm trying to go along with his plans because this was originally his trip, so I'm letting him make all the big decisions, but we'll come in and support when needed and kind of bounce off of each other.
My gosh, you are a very diplomatic young woman. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 23.
All right. So are you at college, or are you working, or what?
I was in college. I studied at Ohio University for a little bit.
Is that the Buckeyes?
No, everyone thinks it is, but it's a little bit step down from the Buckeyes.
Okay.
We're the Bobcats.
All right. Not quite the same ring
I
to it.
decided to take a break, and I work in retail now, just saving up for the trail. And my last day is in a couple weeks.
So it actually was a plan to do a proper ongoing plan to do this. So I can understand why you would do it. So Steve, tell us, have you thought about that part of the relationship? She is your daughter, but when you're out on the trail, you'd be surprised how egalitarian the place becomes.
Yeah, I've thought about it. I imagine we'll probably split up a little bit, during the day, and we've backpacked a couple times together, and we try to stay close, but we'll see how it goes.
I'm guessing she's a bit faster than you. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what? I mean, we've said on this show before, Brooke, I don't know whether you've ever heard our show, you probably haven't, but one of the things we say on the show, and lots of people have said, it's an old saying actually, the last one to Katahdin wins, because you're going to enjoy it so much out there. At some stage, you don't want it to end. You know, I know even I started catching people in my 2014 through hike. And I thought, how am I catching these people up? It's because they were enjoying it so much, they just didn't want it to end. So they were partying and having a good time out there. And the other inevitable important question to ask, and this is a really important question again, have you had the conversation about what if one of you hates it, or if one of you gets injured and doesn't want to carry on? Will the other one then continue or not?
We have not had that talk, but I would want her to continue if it was me, for sure.
What about you,
I don't know
Brooke?
how you feel, Brooke.
I would want him to continue, but if he got injured, I would probably stop, just for safety. And if we have our plan, I would just want to go along with that. But if it was a minor injury, I would probably continue and keep going until he could come back on.
Sure. You know, it's important to think about that, because, you know, you'll be surprised how you are going to rely on each other. And have you got all the gear already for this? Did you have to sort of update some gear, Brooke?
I had most of the gear. A lot of my stuff was a little bit heavier, so I got some lightweight stuff recently, but for the most part, I had most of it.
Right. And still the plan is to go on the 1st of March?
No, we're starting February 18th.
Oh my gosh, you are going soon. So you got a couple of weeks. Yep. So you say your last day at work is when then, Brooke?
My last day is February 8th.
Oh dear. Have you been doing any any sort of workouts or training hikes or shakedowns or anything like that?
I have been trying on my days off. I don't get many days off, but when I do, I've been trying to go on hikes with him and get my gear ready. You know what?
I bet, Steve, you're not secretly, I'm sure you're openly delighted this is happening. Did you actually ask her, or did she just suddenly come to you? Because I think you said earlier you asked her and she said she was open to it. So how did that discussion take place?
I was just thinking one day, and I just asked her, and literally it took like a fraction of a second for her to say yes.
Why didn't you ask him before then, Brooke? You should have said, Dad, can I come with you? I
don't know. I was thinking between either doing the trail or going back to the summer camp I worked this past summer.
No competition. Yeah, do the trail. Definitely.
Yeah.
And have you thought about what you're looking forward to most of all? I've asked Steve these questions. Are there things about the trails particularly you're looking forward to?
I'm looking forward to having spent time together with my dad. Nice. And certain spots. Like, I'm really excited to see the Grayson Highlands and just see the whole adventure.
Yeah. And as you've already been a backpacker, have you allowed yourself to be attracted to a certain trail name yet? Because you're going to get one.
Yeah. I've had a few names this past summer. The kids would call me Bear, and then Bear turned into a whole nother thing. I had Babushka because I would wrap myself up on trip and be like an old lady. But I think I'm gonna get a new name, I think.
I tell you, I'm so pleased. You know, it's funny actually how, and this is a good example actually of how your plans, whatever well-made plans you have, how they change. And you're going to have to alter your hike now, Steve, as well, in many ways. You know, the two of you will be hiking a hike with each other, and that opens up different complications. But as always, I wish you well, and I appreciate you giving me the update. If you get anybody else decides to come along as well before you go, let me know, and we'll have you back on before you actually get started. But you're starting now February the 18th. Let me put that down.
Correct.
February 18th.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, look, we'll catch up again soon. All right. And welcome to the family then, Brooke. Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers then. Bye.
Thanks, Steve.
Bye.
Bye.
Isn't that lovely? I don't have a daughter, but if I did, I don't think I could imagine many things better than her wanting to come on the trail with me to do a through hike. Magical. Good luck, Brooke. Just before we catch up with Dr. Lynn this week, shout out to our recurring donors who always help us so much. This week, they are Jens Lieberheider, Brian Helton Jr., Lisa Rana, Woody Bass, Natisha Webb, and we also got a nice donation again from John Park. Thanks to all of you. And by the way, I'm going to be experimenting with a live Q&A session soon. I'll be doing it in conjunction with Jester, but I plan more of these more sort of intimate gatherings with our donors in the future. So if you want to help out with the shows and ask me any question once a month, then consider becoming a donor through our website at hikingradionetwork.com. So let's hear about the nutritional properties of, among other things, Snickers and Pop-Tarts. Here's Dr. Lynn. Well, we're back on with Lynn. Hey, Lynn, how are you?
Hi, how are you? Good to be here. We were minus 5 degrees Fahrenheit in Connecticut yesterday. Now we're up to 40, so I'm much better
lovely.
today.
Wow, that is a massive difference, isn't it? Did you go out at all in the minus 5?
I did. I had to do my daily frozen feet challenge where I walk 1 mile every day for the first 6 weeks of the year outside. It's a local challenge that our local running club does. You can run, you can walk, you could snowshoe. I did it. I waited till it was about 19 out in the afternoon, but I did it.
Warmed up, you mean?
Yeah.
Jeez. Anyway, today we're talking about nutrition, and do you know, if I'd ever been asked to define what nutrition actually meant, I'm not terribly sure I could have said other than it's food, but it's obviously not that aspect. So what does the word nutrition actually mean in medical terms?
So for us, we generally define nutrition as the ability of the body to utilize the food that has taken in for nourishment so that the cells in the body can maintain their function. It's nourishment utilizing food.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I definitely would have got that. Definitely would have that. And in the information you gave us, which I will be putting on the Google Drive for anybody if they want to look at it, there's quite a lot of stuff there in terms of information. But I was drawn particularly to, you talked particularly about short-term goals and long-term goals. Separate those two out for us.
When I talk about short-term and long-term goals, what I'm trying to tell people about is what kind of energy you need now for the next, let's say, 30 to 60 minutes versus what kind of energy you're going to need over the course of the next several hours or throughout the day. If you're at the bottom of a big mountain and you've got 4,000 feet you need to climb, that's a short-term goal. If you're trying to make 20 miles in a day, that's a long-term goal.
Okay. And so does that mean those goals are literally fed, by different considerations of what you eat?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We get our energy, our nutrition from the food we eat, and it has 3 major categories: the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins.
Sure.
The other categories that are in food are water and vitamins and minerals. We're not going to talk about that too much. We already talked about water the last time, but we're going to talk about the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Carbohydrates are the way our body will get energy quickly. And there's 2 types of carbohydrates: simple carbohydrates, which is basically sugar,
right,
syrups, candy, and there's the complex carbohydrates. Most people have heard that term. And that's things like whole grains, oatmeal, lentils, beans. The simple carbohydrates give you a fast, quick burst of energy, but they don't last very long.
Followed often by a slump, don't they, really?
Exactly. And once that energy burns off, you will need something like complex carbohydrates or fats to continue to be able to move along.
In terms of the complex carbohydrates, what if you took those instead of the simple carbohydrates? Are they slower? In other words, are complex carbohydrates slower to work then?
Yes, they are. Right. Definitely. Okay. Yeah. So it's
Okay.
nice to have a mixture of the simple carbs, the complex carbs, the fats when you're actually active, because you get the quick burn, then you get the longer burn, and then you get the slow burn.
Sure. Okay. And then that's carbs. And then there was it sugar? And
Sugar is part of carbs. Then there was the fat.
That's right. Yeah.
The fat is for long-term energy. If you're going to plan on doing that 20-mile day, you want to make sure you eat something that has fat in it. Peanut butter is a great one. We'll talk about the Snickers bar later because that's got everything in it.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Nuts. Nuts are a great way to get fat in your body.
Right.
I've even heard of people taking swigs of olive oil to keep up their fat.
Yeah. I've seen
That will
yeah.
help you. That will help you throughout the day, long term. Yes.
Okay. And then proteins.
Proteins are really important for recovery. After you've had a long day on the trail, your muscles are spent. They've utilized a lot of their energy, and now they need to recover and repair. So proteins are good for a meal in the evening because that will help aid in recovery of the muscles.
So would I be right in saying then, Lynn, that if you have your protein, say at the beginning of the day, say the middle of the morning or lunchtime, it's kind of a waste, is it? Because it's not, you won't be able to, if that's its function, then it won't be able to perform that function because you're still going to be exhausting your muscles, aren't you?
It's not so much that it's a waste, but it's much more efficient to eat a higher protein meal at night when you're not utilizing your muscles. Your muscles are there resting, and they can use whatever energy they need to repair themselves, get themselves ready for the day, the next day. Protein does supply an energy source. So if I know that there are people on a keto diet that hike, which is a high protein diet. You can definitely have good energy with protein, but if you're going to be on a regular type of a diet, not a specialized type of diet, it would probably be more efficient for you to eat your protein in the evening.
Right. You actually suggested in your notes that you don't think it's a good idea necessarily to have too much of a meal at lunchtime. Is that more an indication that you should just snack something just to get some of those simple carbohydrates going?
It would be better for you to take small amounts of simple and complex carbohydrates as well as fats, maybe even proteins throughout the day, smaller amounts, kind of what we call grazing throughout the day. Every hour or two, a handful of nuts or some Gorp or a Snickers bar or a beef jerky, something like that. That is protein, but still, that's some energy because your body is able to metabolize that more efficiently. If you stop for lunch and it's important to stop for lunch. A lot of people like to take a nice rest, to rehydrate well, maybe take your shoes off. But I don't recommend eating a large meal at lunch because now your body has to actually digest that meal.
Sure.
And your body's digestion will sap energy from what the rest of you needs to do. You're going to be walking again. Some people like to have a nice big lunch and then take a nap. I've seen people do that on the trail, and that's perfectly fine because
I've seen people take 3-hour lunch breaks and literally sleep for 2.5 of them.
Not a problem. If that's what you want, and it's what works best for you.
Yeah.
That's the important thing. You have to find what works best for you. I know for me personally, I can't stop for a large lunch. I have to snack all the way through. I can stop and maybe take a rest for maybe about 15 minutes, and then I have to keep going. Because otherwise, I'm just going to stop, period.
Sure. And also, funny enough, this has only occurred to me while you've been talking about that. It's not one of my questions I had ready. Because I'm going to ask the important question in a minute about Pop-Tarts and Snickers in a minute. But before we get onto that, you're a hiker. You've been hiking for some years, obviously. How do you plan your days as a doctor or a hiker? I mean, how do you plan your days food-wise?
I plan my days as a hiker, and it's taken me several years to figure out what's the best thing for me.
Well, go on then. What is it?
And
Tell us that.
For me, I actually, believe it or not, I don't eat the very first thing in the morning. I hike for maybe about an hour, and then I stop and I have a Kind bar and a nice bottle of water or maybe some electrolytes. And then I hike again, and throughout the day, I snack on things like Kind bars. I like those the best because they're loaded with nuts, sometimes fruit, and syrups or maple syrup or sometimes glucose syrup. Those are the quick burn is the syrup. The nuts are the fat, and the dried fruits are the complex carbohydrates. So they give me great energy. I found that for me works really well. Oh. And then when I get to my end point, either my car or my tent, back shelter for the night, that's when I can chow down on things like a good protein meal. But there's always a great treat in there at some point.
That doesn't make you a bad person.
Yeah. I tell you, I did try, when I was hiking in New Jersey, I stopped at Culver's Gap. There was this terrific trailside restaurant. I think it was called Mountain House or something, maybe Mountain Top. And I stopped there around 4:30, and I said, okay, I'm going to have a nice dinner. And then I had 3 more miles to hike to the shelter. I was going southbound. And I had what I thought was a great, nutritious meal. I had salmon, I had spinach, and I did have some sort of wonderful chocolate mousse cake. It was very hard for me to hike those next 3 miles because I had eaten so much. And my body was utilizing all my energy to try to digest that food, even though it was a really good, nutritious meal. Right. And I was like, I'm exhausted. I am never, ever doing that again. I'm never having a big meal until I am done for the day.
That's called experiencing.
Yeah.
Now, the important question, Snickers or Pop-Tarts, and why?
Both of them are great hiker food because it's just our culture. Snickers bars. I put this in the show notes for people to see. Snickers bar, I looked up, has 12 grams of fat, 32 grams of carbohydrate, and 4 grams of protein in one of those regular size bars. Not the fun size or the small ones, but a regular size bar. So you see that while it doesn't have a whole lot of protein, it has a really good amount of carbohydrate and fat. So it gets you up the mountain, and then it gets you keeping going for the rest of the day. Pop-Tarts have 2.5 grams of fat, 36 grams of carbohydrate, and 2 grams of protein. That's for one pastry. I did the frosted strawberry pastry. So you see it has pretty much totally just the carbohydrate. It's a little bit more carbohydrate than the Snickers bar, but it's much less fat and about half the protein. So that's good for getting you up the mountain. And then if you want that, that's terrific. And then when you stop at the mountain for the view and the rest, you can eat some nuts or something like that to keep you going.
Well, I tell you, I do recommend to people that they do read these notes that Lynn's given us, because there's a lot more information in the notes actually than we've even talked about now. But I appreciate you coming on and talk to us about that. What do we haven't really thought about next week yet. We'll come to that at another time in that case, I think. And I'll get on the phone to you and we'll work out when we're going to be able to speak next. Okay.
Sounds wonderful.
All right then, Lynn. Good to talk to you.
All
Cheers.
right. Have a good week. Bye-bye.
Bye. I've got to tell you, Snickers became a bit of an obsession for me, mainly in 2014, as I was trying to pack on a bit of extra weight at the end of my through hike because I'd lost 60 pounds. We're not sure if Lynn can make it next week, but she's hoping to do a segment on Lyme disease soon, so watch out for that. So, if you're still with me, we're just starting chapter 14 of Then the Hail Came with George Stephanos, with George just starting to almost worry about being home in a few days. Reading it, I entirely understood what he was going through. I'll see you next week. Chapter 14, On the Rocks, Duncannon, Pennsylvania to Delaware Water Gap, Pennsylvania. Tuesday, the 19th of July 1983, mile 1120.1. I felt pretty good when I woke this morning. Perhaps sleeping in until 8 o'clock had something to do with it. I might have slept another couple of hours in an air-conditioned room. I had not been sleeping well in the shelters during the heatwave. Outside my window, heat waves were already shimmering above the asphalt below. I went through my departure preparations with a marked lack of enthusiasm. It was 11 o'clock when I finally loaded my backpack, got dressed and went downstairs. Transferring food from its commercial packaging into Ziploc bags created a large mess of garbage, which I carried down with me in a box. The lady cleaning the rooms was by no means feeble with age, but she wasn't all that young either. It did not seem right to leave all that crap in my room for her to lug down. When I asked her where I could dispose of the trash and declined her offer to handle it for me, she seemed to appreciate my small act of consideration. We had a brief chat before I headed out the door to mail my return package home. I ran my package for home over to the post office and mailed it. I walked back to the hotel, grabbed my backpack and hit the road out of town. As I was leaving, I had a nice conversation with the lady I'd met earlier. She gave me some of the history of the place. The hotel was built around the turn of the century by the Anheuser-Busch brewery. It was one of a string of similar hotels, each centred around a bar that spotlighted the products. When Prohibition came, they sold them all off. It's been a family business ever since. They now rent most of the rooms on a monthly basis to local residents and are fond of the Appalachian Trail hikers who provide much of their overnight business. She went into great detail about how they had kept all the old furnishings to this day, except for the beds. These were a big part of the atmosphere of the place, which I had felt as soon as I walked in yesterday evening. When I left, she told me to watch out for snakes and bad water. She was a nice old lady. She must have really liked me. Yeah, that cuddly and lovable thing again. She paid me one of the highest compliments I've ever received. She actually told a man who had been in the woods sleeping with chipmunks for 2.5 months that she was sorry he could not meet a pretty 19-year-old granddaughter who was away at college. I'm almost certain that I managed to keep the feral gleam out of my eye when I said that I was sorry too. I felt terrific as I followed the Appalachian Trail along streets through the town. Duncannon was a small city with a downtown business district consisting of a few square blocks of mid to early 20th century buildings, like the Doyle Hotel, quickly giving way to tree-lined residential streets. It was a fine, sunny summer day for most outdoor activities other than backpacking, and the locals were out in force working on their homes and yards. They were among the friendliest people I've met on a very congenial trail. The people of Duncannon take pride in the fact that their municipality is the closest trail town to the halfway point of the AT, and they make a special effort to make backpackers feel at home. The AT crossed 2 major rivers, the Juniata and the Susquehanna, on highway bridges along the roadwalk just past the town. The Susquehanna, in southern and central Pennsylvania, is a broad river with few bridges. The Clark's Ferry Bridge was almost a half-mile in length and packed with slow-moving automobiles, belching more smoke and heat into the dead, sultry air. Reaching the 100-degree mark was going to be a cinch again today, if we weren't there already. On the eastern bank, I had to run across a busy 4-lane highway, US 22. The Appalachian Trail paralleled the highway and the river for a quarter mile along a set of railroad tracks. My good feeling was rapidly evaporating. The subsequent climb up Peters Mountain finished the job. The trail up was a steep gully covered with loose rocks rolling around beneath my feet. Dense thickets of briars overgrew stretches of footpath and had to be waded through. A river of sweat was streaming down my forehead into my eyes. I almost stepped on a rattlesnake lying across the trail before I noticed him. He was reluctant to move out of my way until I picked up a long stick and goosed his little reptilian butt. The trail continued to climb, winding its way through fields of huge boulders on ground that was strewn with thousands of loose rocks. After about 3 miles, the trail finally levelled out along the crest of the mountain and the rocks thinned out considerably. It was not bad hiking at all, and I began to make up in large chunks the time I had lost on the ascent. There were several superior views into the valleys below from points along both sides of the ridge. One remaining annoyance was the cloud of gnats that swarmed around my sweaty face as I hiked. I kept my bandana in hand and was continuously compelled to use it to chase them away. Every time I ceased waving in front of my face for a few moments, a gnat would kamikaze directly into one of my eyes. After sustaining about 10 hits in each eye, my vision remained blurry for the remainder of the hike. Hours later, it's only just beginning to be restored. I arrived here at Earl Schaefer Shelter at about 6:30. It had taken me 6.5 hours to hike 10.5 miles. My schedule to Delaware Water Gap could be in trouble. I was aware that the time had come to face the famous rocks of eastern Pennsylvania, which thus far have not been quite as bad as their reputation, but nobody ever mentioned the thorns. My arms and legs are a bloody mess, which no doubt is part of the attraction for the swarms of gnats, mosquitoes and biting flies who have been my steady hiking companions since Duncannon. I don't remember reading about them either, and the record heat is beginning to grind me down. The thermometer has failed to reach the mid-90s once since Shenandoah and has been topping 100 for almost a week. I've been tapping into the reserves constantly lately, and the benefits of those few easy days in northern Virginia have been used up. I have a splendid illustration before me of what I cannot allow to happen. There's a semi-through hiker at this shelter, a man who had started weeks before I did. I've already caught up to him, and I am just slightly ahead of the pace required to finish the Appalachian Trail in early October. He lost the will to pay the price to reach Katahdin somewhere, and now is just drifting along. Wednesday the 20th of July 1983, mile 1137.4. I left the shelter this morning at 7 o'clock, not a terribly early start, and that dude was still in bed. I guess that I won't be seeing him on Katahdin. The remainder of the trail over Peters Mountain was much like the last few miles of hiking yesterday. The rocks continued to be tolerable. There were but a few exceptionally bad stretches. Thus far, only about 25% of the trail since Cumberland Valley has been particularly rocky. I was expecting much worse after all the horror stories that I have heard concerning the Pennsylvania rocks, but I'm not quite ready to begin my victory celebration. There's still a ways to go before I'm out of this state. The descent from Peters Mountain in its steepness was a replay of yesterday's climb, but it was shorter and thus was over more quickly. I stopped at an excellent spring a half mile from the bottom. I didn't know it at the time, but that turned out to be the last good water on the Appalachian Trail for almost 12 miles. Fortunately, out of habit, I camelled up. I drank 3 pints of water on the spot to saturate my tissues and carried another 3 pints with me in my canteen. The ensuing climb up Stony Mountain was a surprising throwback to the good old days of nicely graded trails down south. The old woods road that the AT followed took more than 3 miles to climb about 1,100 feet. My map showed a spring near the summit alongside a spot where a fire tower once stood. The spring was dry. There was a very slight descent and ascent between the crests of Stony Mountain and Sharp Mountain. Then it was all ridge walk for the final 7 miles of the day. The Appalachian Trail followed the traces of an old stage road for most of that distance, passing through an attractive wooded tract known as St. Anthony's Wilderness. In the mid-1800s, it had been a prosperous industrial region with coal mines, a branch railroad, and several thriving villages. Later in the century, it was a popular resort area centred around the mineral baths of Cold Spring Station, a large village well off the AT route at the base of the mountain. The trail this afternoon passed through the site of one of the other old villages. Nothing was left but a few crumbling piles of rocks, the remains of old house foundations. I did the final 5 miles from the Yellow Creek Village ruins to the shelter in 90 minutes, barely winning a race with the massive thunder shower which I could see approaching. Thanks to the impetus of that storm, I arrived at the shelter before 4 o'clock and had the day's hike done with early for the first time in a very long while. I hiked 17 miles today in 8.5 hours, with 3 long rest stops along the way. As it was only my second day out since resupplying in Duncannon, I was carrying an exceptionally heavy backpack. The rocks do not seem to be slowing me down all that much, so far. The Rausch Gap shelter is known to backpackers as the Halfway Hilton. It's a marvellous piece of work. The foundation is constructed of mortared stone and the place boasts a courtyard tiled with smooth rocks and surrounded by stone walls. There's a tall hemlock rising from the centre of the courtyard, whose trunk supports and is encircled by a round wooden picnic table. The roof has a plastic skylight and a long pipe brings water from a nearby spring to a trickling cascade at the edge of the courtyard. Extremely civilised. My guidebook said that the project required 57 volunteer workers and 14 months to be completed, and the results speak for themselves. It's one of the 2 or 3 finest shelters I've seen on the Appalachian Trail. Several local short-term backpackers were staying at the shelter. One had a radio. The weather report called for no relief in sight from the record heat and humidity and scattered afternoon thunder showers. That last part was especially bad news for me because I'm compelled to camp out tomorrow night. The next shelter is 32 miles away. Still, after today, I'm feeling a little more optimistic about my chances of staying on schedule and covering the remaining 116 miles to Delaware Water Gap in 5.5 days. And tomorrow, after I walk just over a mile, I will be exactly 1,000 miles from Katahdin. New England looms close tonight. I'm pushing hard lately because I feel a strong need to get back home and connect with my old life for a few days. I still cannot get over the way the Appalachian Trail has taken me over. After weeks of living, talking, thinking, dreaming nothing but the AT, I can barely remember my home and my friends as I sit here tonight, a few hundred miles away in central Pennsylvania. I simply cannot believe any longer in a world where you sleep every night in a bed, having running water constantly at fingertips, and you need not carry 50 pounds around on your back all day. I now feel as out of place in large crowds of people as a hermit in Times Square. Time to go to bed. Connecticut is 279.80 miles away.